Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Still on a deadly rampage, the monster coronavirus continues killing people by the thousands in China. The number of cases in the U.S. has doubled, and a new study shows this virus is deadlier than the flu. And while we're talking about deadly, the plague of locusts is now spreading from Africa to Asia. Tremendous famine may be in their wake. George Thomas is going to have us more on that. But first, here's Mark Martin with the latest on the coronavirus.
China's update raised the number of people who have died from the coronavirus in mainland China to more than 1,800 and the total number of confirmed cases to more than 72,000. 14 Americans infected with the coronavirus were flown into the country Monday. That nearly doubles the number of cases in the U.S. Those new victims coming from a cruise ship in Japan, and authorities did not detect the infections until the last minute. Now Chinese health officials releasing the first analysis on all the victims. The findings, about 2.3% of coronavirus victims die, making it more dangerous than the seasonal flu. Most who succumb to the disease, about 60%, are in their 60s or older. More than half of China is on lockdown or travel restriction, and there are concerns about how the country informed the world community.
Greater concern with regard just to this coronavirus alone is the secrecy and control of the Chinese Communist Party. Of course, this goes all the way back to the beginning of December. Didn't really start coming out until mid-January. By then, the epidemic had spread.
Meanwhile, we're learning more about how the church in China is responding to the crisis. The lead pastor of Root and Fruit Christian Church in Wuhan, Wang Li, says no meetings are allowed because of the lockdown, so churches are meeting online.
It is just not our own ideas for protection. It is also a hard rule by the government. No more physical meetings are allowed.
Churches in China and around the world called for 3 days of fasting and prayer in early February.
It is our way to cry to God to repent and ask God to stop this plague. We ask God to help His people on earth, help us to survive. So with this prayer, I think the children of God in Wuhan got to closely connect with their brothers and sisters all over the world, to encourage one another and care for each other.
The virus is affecting the economy. Apple announcing today that it will miss its revenue forecast due to global supply constraints and lower Chinese demand due to the shutdown in major Chinese cities. Mark Martin, CBN News.
Well, in other news, yesterday we told you about hordes of locusts putting millions of Africans at risk of famine. And now the dire threat is spreading. Ephraim Grimm has more from our CBN newsroom.
Pat, the plague of locusts marching through Africa is also invading other continents as well. As you can see from this map, massive group of locusts are swarming through the Middle East and countries like Yemen, Iran, and Pakistan into India, with some reported even in China. Billions of the locusts are ravaging through East Africa, devastating crops. That could lead to deadly threats of hunger for millions of people in the region. The United Nations has warned of the risk of a catastrophic famine. Pat?
Well, senior international correspondent George Thomas is just back from Africa. He joins us now. George, I'm shocked to learn that these locusts have actually been spotted in China. How is that possible?
Yeah, absolutely. As my kids would say, Pat, that is cray-cray. I mean, it really is crazy. But the officials from the Food and Agriculture Organization warned the Chinese authorities on February 11th that a swarm of locusts leaving Africa would fly across the Red Sea, across Europe, and into the westernmost province of China known as Xinjiang. Incidentally, it's a province that I have been to, and this is the winter season in Xinjiang province. And so Chinese authorities told the national media just in the last 48 hours, they are not concerned of any threat from these locusts because it is wintertime in Xinjiang province. and they say it's very unlikely that these locusts will travel further inland into China. China, as you know, Pat, has all of the various wherewithal to deal with this. They've got high-tech technology. They've even told the United Nations that they've been tracking this particular swarm of locusts coming into the western part of China, so they're not concerned.
Does anybody know what the origin of these locusts from? Where did they come from?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if you were to look back in 2018, we have a map that was provided to us by the United Nations, but off the coast of Yemen and Oman, there's a desert region that's primarily, there's no water. And last year they got hit by torrential rainfall. And then they had 2 cyclones hit that very region. That is very, very unusual, Pat. And those conditions gave rise and just allowed these locusts to multiply by the millions. And now, obviously, the concern, all eyes, as we focused on yesterday, all eyes are on the Horn of Africa, East Africa. But as you look at the map, the border region of India and Pakistan, they are also concerned in that region, and also along the both sides of the Red Sea, Sudan, Saudi Arabia, and Yemen. But right now, as you mentioned, Pat, all eyes are on the Horn of Africa. You see there, all those red dots represent millions, billions of swarms of locusts, and that is the concern. That's where all the focus is right now, Pat.
George, one last question. Do you have any knowledge of how many people may be affected by this from starvation?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, those who are really in the crosshairs are folks in Africa. I mean, India, Pakistan, Iran, China, they all have the wherewithal. They're not dealing with acute, food shortages. They're not so much at risk. They have the wherewithal to deal with this. My biggest concern is those who are living in Africa. As I mentioned yesterday, that particular region of the area that's being hit right now, the estimates are between 18 million to 20 million are already facing acute food shortages. This is making it worse. Hopefully, that the United Nations and other NGOs can step in the next few months. Again, the harvest and the planting season, the planting and the harvest season happened between now and June, and so really hoping that they can curb this before it gets any worse.
Thank you, George. You know, ladies and gentlemen, you turn to the Bible, and the Lord Jesus said there are going to be famines, there are going to be plagues, there are going to be earthquakes, famines and plagues. So you've got the famine developing through these locusts. You got the plague of coronavirus, and you, of course, got wars and rumors of wars building all around the world. I mean, it looks like I don't want to be some kind of an alarmist, but it does seem that some of the things are now coalescing to bring about a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Well, there's something that's going on here that I wouldn't say is biblical, but it certainly is unfortunate. The third worst floods in the history of Mississippi, Ephraim has that.
Pat, those floodwaters continue to cover parts of the South. In Jackson, Mississippi, hundreds of homes affected by floodwaters covering dozens of city streets. While the Pearl River appears to have crested, authorities are warning hundreds of evacuees in the area not to rush back home until they get the all clear. But Monday, Governor Tate Reeves did say they don't expect higher water levels in the central part of the state, even though more rain is expected. Meanwhile, the Tennessee River overflowed its banks earlier in the week. You're looking at video showing water up to the rooftops of homes in Hardin County. New questions over the U.S. military strike that killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. A recent White House memo to Congress does not cite an imminent threat, leading Democrats to question the legitimacy of the attack. But one security expert tells CBN's Eric Phillips there were strong indications of Iran's next move.
In that region, he provided insight on so-called chatter regarding the situation and how it harkened back to the 1979 hostage situation.
He was worse than Osama bin Laden. He was worse than Baghdadi. He was worse than Zarqawi.
That's why last month, at my direction, the U.S. military executed a flawless precision strike that killed Soleimani and terminated his evil reign of terror forever.
It was the best move we could have made.
Michael Pregent of the Hudson Institute says the clear picture provided by sources of the threat Soleimani posed to the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad made his demise a must.
The chatter was that they were going to do a 1979 hostage siege. They were going to take over the embassy, take all the Americans in the embassy hostage, and then broker release for sanctions relief.
While Soleimani was the main target, Pregent says the other terror leader killed in the strike would have also played a key role in the siege.
The chatter was they were going to put Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes in as prime minister, so do a coup, and then seize the embassy.
Pregent says when militia forces penetrated the U.S. Embassy on December 31st, it was essentially a dress rehearsal for what was to come.
They walked into the embassy without weapons, trashed it, saw how close they could get to it, saw that they could throw things over, saw that they could get as close as to almost breaking the windows where the U.S. guards were on the other side. The next thing they wanted to do was roll through the embassy in a protest of civilians with Iraqi flags and make it look like the protesters were taking the embassy, when it would actually be the militias.
Pregent says if Soleimani and al-Mohandes had lived, a coup was all but certain.
Killing Qasem Soleimani was actually a de-escalating event. It sent a message to the regime that the president was really serious about hurting Iran.
Pregent also addressed the tidal wave of criticism the president faced as Democrats demanded the intelligence that led to the decision to take out Soleimani. Pregent points out it's important to remember that intelligence does not confirm an imminent attack. It only hints at one. In Washington, Eric Phillips, CBN News.
Eric, thank you. Pat?
That's another exclusive you're getting here on CBN News. I'm sure that I appreciate the work that our news team is doing to bring you these stories, but this is one that, you don't hear. There's so much criticism of the president. As a matter of fact, there was a move in the Senate to restrict his powers following the Soleimani hit. And it turned out he averted something that could have been a takeover of our embassy and a possible coup for the nation of Iraq. Whew. Well, there's something else that I think we're going to see. I believe the Democrats are going to turn on Mike Bloomberg like banshees. It's going to be another bloodbath of the Democrats, and Ephraim has more about that.
Pat, billionaire Michael Bloomberg will face his fellow Democratic candidates for the president on the debate stage for the very first time. Bloomberg has qualified for Wednesday night's debate in Las Vegas just days before Saturday's Nevada caucus. He broke into double digits in 4 national polls to make the cut. An NPR PBS NewsHour Marist survey of for the former New York City mayor took 19%. Ahead of former Vice President Joe Biden and second only to frontrunner Bernie Sanders. Pat?
Amy Klobuchar said, in a debate, I can take him. I can't take all that television because it's so expensive. But I believe if he gets in there, it will be a big mistake for him because they're going to go after him for sexist remarks he's made, for racial things that had to do with that stop and frisk. He's going to be so vulnerable, and to be in the midst of that, and he will be the target of every one of them. Mm-hmm. So what does it say? When your enemy is killing himself, don't stop them. Yeah. Well, let it go. Terry?